Welcome to the Live Full, Work Fun podcast. This is the show to encourage you to live your life to the fullest and do fun work that fuels your lifestyle. Hi, I'm your host, Gayla Scrivener. Every week, you'll be introduced to amazing guests, useful resources, and inspirational stories. You'll discover opportunities and perspectives to shape your version of living full and working fun. Hi there and welcome. This season, we're exploring the theme, Don't Let the Start Stop You. It's a powerful reminder that while beginnings can be daunting, they're also the gateway to growth, success, and happiness. That's why today I asked Evan Cox to return to the show for a conversation. For over 15 years, Evan has served businesses, nonprofits, and leaders who guide them. Today, he has the privilege of serving nonprofits and businesses with clear marketing that supports their mission as a Story Brand certified guide. Unfortunately, marketing often gets a bad rap. Evan believes that marketing, when done right, is simply an avenue to create and build more relationships. No sleazy tactics, no ambiguous metrics. Your audience is counting on you to be a trusted partner they can rely on. Your marketing efforts exist to support that mission. Evan, that's exactly my sentiments. I love that you're back on the show because I love talking with a fellow marketer.
I do too. We usually can nerd out on some fun topics, but also we have a lot of shared experiences. It doesn't take long to find commonalities there. So I'm excited for the conversation.
We're both Story Brand certified guides. And in the intro, I said a little bit about marketing gets a bad rap. It has for years. I don't know about you, but when I first started being out on my own and then I got into marketing, I didn't feel most comfortable, especially trying to sell my own services. It's all in communication. Communication can be used for good and for evil, I guess you could say. I love that you serve your clients to be a trusted partner that they can rely on. Well, how does one do that?
Oh, that's a great question. When I think about the whole process of getting started, there's multiple layers, kind of like that onion metaphor. It could be the idea of getting started in marketing, or in our context, it could be like getting started in marketing, but then like running a marketing company. Like there's different layers to that. But what I find is, yes, there are tactics or campaigns or like technical elements of what I do as a marketer or a consultant for my clients. But what I love so much about this season and theme is that a lot of it is just urging and reminding fellow business owners, entrepreneurs, leaders, nonprofit executive directors that like the ultimate goal that you want to achieve is only possible when you get started. And getting started is messy and it doesn't always look exactly like the outcome you want. But my gosh, in order to get there, it does take saying like, let's get something implemented.
Can you share a moment that you had this big goal or this big dream? It was just hard to get started on, or you almost gave up.
Yeah. So two stories quickly come to mind. I'll share both of them. My entrance into being an entrepreneur and starting a business is not some like grandiose plan that like is a storybook novel or something that's going to hit Hollywood. I realized that I had an ability with marketing or writing or even building websites that other folks didn't have. And the first time it dawned on me was when I dropped off my daughter and son at preschool. They went to a church that had a preschool. And I quickly realized when we signed them up, I'm like, oh my gosh, the link to their website is broken. There is a page on the website that's talking about, but like nothing works. Like all of it is broken. And so quickly I said like, okay, I heard you mention that your enrollment was down. What would it look like if we swapped my tuition for getting you a website? And that was actually my foray into consulting and marketing for companies and for nonprofits, is I was like, ooh, this ended up being a sweet spot for me that they couldn't own. And I was able to do this much faster than what it would have taken. Like, oh, like this was my version of getting started. It wasn't like it has this like Hollywood ending, but I was like, oh, Like that was the genesis. That was the starting point for my company. I was working for a large nonprofit at the time. So, I mean, I had the marketing skills, like I had some of the background. Anybody who works in the nonprofit space knows like you have a job title, which is what people think you do. And then you have all of the things that come with your job that never like hit a job description. They're like all the other things you also have to do. And so marketing just became like this thing that also came with all my other roles. And then I was like, oh my gosh, I really enjoyed that process, that experience. I always thought about doing a side hustle or a side, and so like that was actually the starting point. I just saw an opportunity, and it wasn't like I had the business I have today, but I just saw like a moment, and I'm like, oh, I think this could work. And then I kept stacking those experiences until eventually started my own company.
That's great. Now, you said you had a second example?
Oh, yes. So when I got hired at an organization, gosh, 15 plus years ago, they had a couple of criteria in that interview process they wanted to make sure this candidate had. And that one thing was grant writing. I did have grant writing experience, but I had done grant writing in one class back in college, and we covered it for one day. And
Oh,
so that interview was on a Friday, and they're like, hey, we're looking for all these qualities. One of those things is grant writing. And so in that moment, I was like, sure, no problem. Like that can definitely be a component. I can handle that. I went and got grant writing for dummies that afternoon after the interview. I read it all weekend and came back with my game plan, which was the outline of the book. On Monday, I got hired and then I used that book. I had it under my desk. And that was how I got started. Like I followed the outline of the book, and that was how I built my game plan. And it was that point where I was like, you don't have to have all of the answers up front to build a game plan. Like you just have to have a goal and your next right step.
I love that, Evan. What I got out of that is like sometimes the opportunity presents itself and you say yes and figure it out, that next best step. And there is nothing wrong with getting that grant book for dummies. That's awesome. I love
And it
that.
was super helpful. It outlined all the stuff. I'm like, I knew this, but I didn't know that. And so I found that to be kind of a helpful framework for internal roles in companies, but also in building a business that I'm like, oh, I need to have a goal. I need to feel like that's within my realm or sweet spot. And then if I have a couple of next right steps, if I've never done it before, but I feel like I have a framework to get there, then I feel pretty confident that we can do it.
Let's turn to those that you serve, your clients. What's the biggest problem or obstacle that they face when they come to you to work with you?
I find, especially in the marketing space, you probably see this too. A lot of my clients are bought in on the outcome or one of the possible tactics to get to that outcome. But there's a wide chasm between I want to accomplish this and I'm not quite sure how to make the whole process or any of the actually get there. A website, for example. You don't have to convince any business leader that they need a website today. Now, you might have to convince them of what that website should do. Like there's a variety of opinions, but nobody's going to debate you today for the most part and say, I just don't think a website is important. But there's a big difference between, yes, I should probably have a website, and how do I make that website actually turn into the 24/7 sales machine that every marketer touts in their marketing, or the thing that brings in donations or brings in right fit customers. There's actually a big gap between I know I need this, and I don't know exactly how to make that thing become the thing that provides the outcome I want. And so for a lot of my clients, it's figuring out, is that a cohesive marketing strategy? Is that a fundraising plan? Is that a website? Whatever that component is, how can we make sure that it's aligned with the ultimate goal you want?
Getting a perspective of the journey that it might take. It's not an overnight type of process. Are there things out there in the marketplace that it lends to believe that, oh, I'm supposed to get a URL and then everything works? There's more to that.
Yeah, and marketing is really good at that. Actually, our fellow marketers often are really good at that. We've identified a problem, and so now we can make our answer the cure-all solution. And sometimes that is the case. Like I think of like a band-aid and my daughter has a cut. Like, okay, like that seems to be a problem, a solution that's a pretty simple one. But a lot of the things that we work through, especially as like a marketing consultant or a business coach, like any of those realms that we tend to play in, when you offer expertise, it's rarely that simple. Even if you have a helpful framework, like we both love the StoryBrand framework, it is descriptive of a process that is helpful, not prescriptive of an antidote that is always the answer in this package. It's got some descriptive elements, but it's not prescriptive. And I find that a lot of clients are looking for the silver bullet or the easy button because that's what's been marketed to them. It's really hard to think through like, oh, I need to thoughtfully approach my message or what I'm doing in this route to actually get what I'm after.
Well, one of the things that we're trained on within the Story Brand framework is to give the person a plan, a 3-step plan. And that's something that it makes our brain easier to say, okay, this can be as easy as 1, 2, 3 to start working with you, or this is 1, 2, 3 of how to get the outcome. It's not as easy as that. Those 1, 2, 3 steps, there's time in between. What do you think about presenting it that way?
Yeah, I think in some scenarios, like that is a great example because I don't always use the 3-step plan on a homepage, for example, for every single customer or client. There was one organization where I was like, oh my gosh, it is a long sales cycle and it is a high deal value. And there's no way that someone is going to get from start to finish in 1, 2, 3 and say, oh, it's that simple because we don't sell a widget. And so we had to thoughtfully adapt the 3-step plan, remove it from the homepage and say, actually, we're going to use a 3-step plan at a couple of unique moments in the sales process to let people know the next component of your journey with us looks like 1, 2, 3. And so you're right. Like you don't want to be dishonest. You want to make sure it comes through. This is clear and that we can get you an outcome. But I do think there's a responsibility when you're guiding someone, a fellow business owner or a nonprofit leader, there's a responsibility to say like, okay, is what we are saying not just clear? And is it not just what we want them to do, but is it clear this is in your best interest? And here is the whole like, are we being honest and true with what we're saying? And so I think that 3-step plan is a perfect example. It's supposed to be used in a variety of ways, but it's not prescriptive. And if you do have a long deal cycle and it's a high value, you may not want to put it smack dab at the top of your homepage. It may need to live somewhere else.
I love that you say that because there are so many frameworks out there, not just marketing, but that's why we read books, we listen to podcasts, we see how other people do things and they develop frameworks. And I think it's important to learn from every place we can and adapt something that works for us. And I'm glad that you said that because having frameworks are a great tool, but in our business, you have to think through what makes sense for that customer journey, what makes sense to have authentic conversation to move folks appropriately through a sales funnel, or to discount them that they're not the right client.
Yeah. Or in our case, if a client has not done any marketing or no marketing in a certain discipline, it might be helpful to say, like, getting started and not staying stuck is that we're going to try these handful of things. We're going to thoughtfully test them, not make it a silver bullet and see what resonates, and then do more of that thing. The framing up front that getting started is going to be a test can sometimes feel a little bit nerve-wracking, especially if people are putting money on the line. But I think we owe it to our clients to walk through it and say, listen, best practice experience tells me these are some good options. Maybe one of the approaches we could take is testing them to see what resonates.
What are some symptoms of folks being like stuck and frustrated that they would need to talk with a marketer like yourself?
Oh, that's a great question. We've been talking a little bit about StoryBrand, so we can use that just as an example. That's a messaging framework, right, that allows you to get into a story that honors the hero as the customer or the person that's in the driver's seat and you as a guide. If you're continually stuck because you've read that book or you've heard that framework expounded on some like a podcast or in a speaking engagement, and you just can't seem to get it right, at some level, it might be that you're too close to what's happening and you need some outside perspective. And so getting stuck looks like, okay, on maybe some level, it's hiring a consultant, or it's bringing in somebody else from your team, or it's getting a friend who knows your business from a different lens or vantage point. And I find that out a lot. Like, even if we do work on messaging or website, it's how do we get input? How do we get somebody else's perspective? I actually did that right before our conversation earlier this afternoon. I had somebody who had no knowledge of a project we were working on take a look at something and give some really helpful feedback that I had never thought of this campaign through that lens. I might want to make an adjustment on that.
Nice. Now, I'm going to shift gears just a tad,
Let's do it.
but you have a family and you have your own business. How do you juggle it all and make work enjoyable and fulfilling? And what strategies do you use?
I knew you were going to ask this question. It's a good one. I don't know that I have it all figured out. And probably anybody who says that they do is probably not being 100% honest. What I have tried to do is every morning, I actually have a morning run sheet or process that I work through. For me, that's spending some moments in silence. I do a little bit of reading. I'm currently reading a good book on copywriting, so like I have kind of an order to my day. And at the top are some statements that I either believe or hope to be true, and I try to either read or recite those every morning. And I look at those statements. One of those statements for me is don't internalize the hurry. I am easily moved on to the next thing, but slowing down is helpful, both family life and work. And then number two is don't miss the little moments today because it will become tomorrow's biggest regrets. And so that means that when my daughter, who is in junior high, gets home, usually it's about 3:45, just depends. The rest of our family doesn't get home till 4:30. I have about a 30 to 40-minute window where if she wants to play a board game or go on a walk or do something, I'm like, ooh, several times a week, I try to prioritize closing the laptop early, knowing I might have to do something else later, but like I've got a little window of time. So I'm trying to not miss the little moments that feel insignificant in the middle of all the chaos, because I feel like tomorrow that could become the biggest regret if I'm not careful.
That is wonderful. Yeah, slowing down. I find myself, the older I get, the more I feel more intentional and not rushed in my pace and appreciate what's around me and appreciate those moments. And how old are your kids?
I've got a 12-year-old, a 10-year-old, and a 6-year-old. So
Oh,
not too wide of a gap, but there is a significant range there between 6 and 12.
yeah, you don't want to miss any of that. That's awesome. That
And
is,
that looks like last week, my daughter did a Girl Scout trip to Gatlinburg, Tennessee with my wife. And so we had a boys' weekend and we spent all weekend doing all the things that the boys wanted to do. My wife had a relaxing time with our daughter. I was trying to keep two boys alive. Like that was my goal. Like they're like, we should do rock climbing, like with no cords. I'm like, no, we should definitely not do that. Like we should climb a tree and not have a heart. No, no, we should not do that. But yes, I do find those things that I read in the morning to really help like remind me like, ooh, I get to do this and I get to set my schedule. And if my schedule's too busy, then that's probably a reflection on how I've done an intentional or not intentional job of setting that. Like that is something that is hard in the moment to recognize, but that practice in the morning is a great grounding exercise for me.
if you find yourself like today, you mentioned before we hit record that today was an unusually heavy phone day for you.
It was.
Do you find yourself rearranging things if you need to periodically so that you can spend more time where you need to and then
Hmm.
postpone other things?
Yeah. So part of that is super mechanical and practical. I use Calendly to schedule a lot of my activities. I know that you do too. And so if I'm continually saying, ooh, this day is too busy, and it's like 3 weeks in a row that it's always, I'm like, oh, I should probably change my availability. Like that's why it keeps getting booked up because I'm saying it's available. In today's case, I had a couple of calls where I'm like, ooh, it's not a fire emergency, but it is something that's kind of urgent and time sensitive. I should definitely add that component in. But last Friday, I had one call. And so I look at the balance and I'm like, okay, overall, as we get closer to the year, I work with a lot of nonprofits. And so the end of the year is usually a busier time for me, just because end of year fundraising and campaign, I'm like, that tracks. Now, will I keep readjusting? Yeah, I definitely need to. And if I notice a pattern of multiple weeks where I'm like, oh, this is the same that it was last week, I'm like, okay, it's time to go back to the drawing board.
Evan, I'm wondering, what kind of advice would you give someone who's hesitating about taking a first step and letting the start stop them? They've got this big ambition, but they're just hesitating.
I was actually talking with another entrepreneur this morning about what is a low risk way to take a next step. So in that conversation, I was like, could you pull out a pad or a Google Doc or an Evernote file or like whatever you use and say, like, if I were to take this action, what's at risk? And so we actually documented out, like, okay, here's what's at risk, these 3 or 4 things. Sometimes de-risking your move forward can help you say, like, oh, yes, I'm going to go live on a product launch, or yes, I'm going to live on a what, but you can change your website. Like, that's the beauty of digital marketing. Like, you don't like that headline or that doesn't feel like it's you. Okay, the next day you hop in and you change the headline and you're good. Or with social media, you edit the post, or the next day nobody saw that post for whatever reason because of the algorithm, and you post something different. Like, a lot of times I think de-risking our decisions that feel really final is a helpful first step. And then if it does feel risky, assess, like, am I willing to take that risk or not? But then find out, like, what is a less risky thing that I can say yes to? Because I learned from a mentor, actually in that role we were talking about earlier, a statement that was super helpful. I choose to not be confused. And there's a lot of moments that are confusing, and rightfully so, completely understandable. But I've found that to be helpful, that if I take the posture of I'm going to choose to not be confused, it starts to clarify, like, okay, I've got a couple of next steps I could take. I have to choose one. Which one is the best logical right next step to take? And it couldn't just be marketing. It could be in your business or hiring a team member. We talked about, like, how many folks are on our team. So, like, there's a lot of things that applies to, but I find de-risking and then saying, okay, I'm not going to say yes or no to moving forward. I'm just going to say which one of these next steps helps me move forward.
It could be just reading a book, educating yourself. Do you even want to go down that path? Or it could be a lot of things. I love that you choose not to be confused. I love that, Evan. Well, thank you so much for being with me here today. Evan, how can we continue to follow you and stay in contact with you?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn. If you just type in Evan Cox, or you can go to my website, super simple, evancoxconsulting.com. I've got some free resources and blogs and things out there. And my goal is, if you're on my newsletter for an entire year, that if you apply everything that I share, you could actually do almost any of the projects that I can do for you on your own. Now, there's some nuance to that, but that's how we try to frame our resources. So if any of those are helpful, you can find them there. I'd be happy to share.
That is wonderful. And I'll have your links down in the show notes. Thanks for being here, Evan.
I'm so honored to do it. Thanks.
Well, thanks for listening. I hope today's conversation with Evan has sparked some inspiration and has shown you that even the most successful entrepreneurs started exactly where you are, at the beginning. If you'd like to learn more about Evan's work and connect with him, you'll find all the relevant links down in the show notes. Remember, every successful journey begins with that first step. Don't let the start stop you from pursuing your dreams and creating the business and life you desire. Until next time, live full, work fun.